Everything's off its axis. It's a little unusual. Apparently now Putin and Kim Jong-un are noble, intelligent role models, and Canada's a bunch of giant ass. Like, that's hard to get used to. You're redoing the post-war alliances, only this time we're with the Axis powers.
Joining us now is Zerlina Maxwell, Senior Director of Progressive Programming at SiriusXM Radio and an MSNBC political analyst. Maria Teresa Kumar and Evan Siegfried are back with us. Zerlina, let me start with you. We don't have the video of it, but we got those quotes from Politico, former President Obama talking to a group of Democrats last night. The thing that struck me was he was describing himself. Yeah. He was describing how Democrats reacted to him when he sort of rose to the presidency in the first place. And he was saying, don't be looking for that. Don't be waiting for that. But do Democrats need that?
Well, I think that a lot of people are waiting for that, but I think Barack Obama was really once in a lifetime, not just as a historical figure, but as someone who has both the policy chops and the charisma. That's almost like a unicorn. And so what Democrats need to do is essentially focus on turnout, because that is what's going to win the election in 2018 and also in 2020. You saw in 2016 that turnout was down among many of the most important groups in the Democratic base. Black turnout was down, Latino turnout was down. And so you have to ensure that our voters get to the polls and cast their ballot. There is no other way to change this country.
And Evan, the flip side of this is we look at by all indications right now, a motivated Democratic base, at least in 2018 in the midterm. The number that strikes me on the Republican side, though, is President Trump's support from Republican voters. It's sitting there at 90% right now. And if you look at modern presidents within their own parties, his is about as high as it gets, which is even more striking because his overall number is not that great. What is it that drives that? Because this is a guy that got less than half the vote among Republicans in 2016 in their primaries, and yet now this is like W after 9/11 with them.
You're forgetting one thing. The Republican Party has been shrinking, and the people who support him are the ones staying. So, of course, you're going to have closer to 100% than 0%. And when between December 2015 and March 2017, 23% of Republicans aged 18 to 29 left the party compared to 8% of Democrats. We have a massive demographic crisis in this party, and that we can only really field an electorate to help sustain us for maybe 2-3 more cycles unless we start appealing to other groups. And that includes African Americans, Hispanic Americans, gays, and even urban Americans, which Republicans don't even compete in anymore. There are tumbleweeds running for office that do better than Republican candidates, and it's disappointing.
There was a study this week that came out, a study of millennials that I found interesting, and it showed that the number who identified as Democrats actually in the last couple of years had dropped by a fairly significant number. I think it was about a 9-point drop, and it was attributed most directly to white male millennials. And the suggestion was that the way our politics are all playing out right now, to everything in politics and in life, there's a reaction, right? And Democrats, we've seen this rise of female candidates this year at historic levels. Is there a possibility there that there's sort of a subsequent defection of males to the Republican Party? Is that?
I wouldn't say it's a defection of males to the Republican Party. NBC News and Gen 4 did an amazing survey in January, which found that 66% of millennials want a third party. They look at government and they see something that's broken. They think they can impact change more effectively from a nonprofit than they can by actually voting. So the key is rebuilding trust in government, and you have to actually accomplish things as a government, and that means doing things in a bipartisan manner, and right now that's not happening. So we have to vote for candidates who are willing to reach across the aisle and say, you know what, we might not agree 100%, but let's do something good for the country.
Maria Teresa Kumar, I'm curious, when you look at that, we played, Jon Stewart there, that soliloquy on Colbert's show last night, and obviously that speaks, I think, directly to Democratic voters out there, folks who are offended by the president. But I do wonder, that level of activation, does that trigger a backlash among Republican voters at all that binds them to Trump in response, where maybe we don't like Trump on this, maybe we don't like him on that, but hey, he's under such attack, we better stick with him because we don't want to be with the other side?
Well, I think that what you speak to, Steve, is that we actually have to create a space where people could admit that they voted for the wrong candidate. And by constantly attacking and trying to label all Republicans with a broad brush, saying that they are bigoted or racist, it actually doesn't improve or advance a political agenda. It doesn't heal wounds. It doesn't allow people to come forward and say, you know what, I thought that I was going to get something else, but in reality, this man is a con man. People get back to their corners. But let's be clear, in the next 3 years, we're going to have a tsunami of young Generation Z voters voting for the first time. We're expecting 12 million voters who are becoming eligible, 2/3 of them young people of color. Disproportionately, there are going to be 12 million more voters than baby boomers. So you have that faction. Then you also have the 93 million of Americans who decided that they were going to sit it out. They didn't want either party. And I think that not only are a majority of Americans identifying more with independent, they also want people to feel that they're providing them with actual solutions. When you look at what happened in Virginia, it was down ballot candidates that were speaking to issues that people cared about, bread and butter issues, how to fix community, how to talk to each other, how to be civil, but providing solutions. And that is, at the end of the day, what American people want to talk about. They are tired of pendulum elections, but they're also tired of the stress level that they're feeling every single time the president tweets. If anything, they want to tone it down, they want to get back to basics, and they want to be able to know that tomorrow there's going to be a new America. The majority of Americans are incredibly hopeful, and the president is providing very little hope, but a lot of chaos.
And Zerlina, that generational shift that Maria Teresa Kumar is talking about there, I thought this week we got an example of that. Yeah. New York, Joe Crowley, one of the top Democrats in D.C., he's toppled by a 28-year-old Latina. I wonder, when we look ahead to 2020, if you take a poll right now, to the extent these things mean anything, the front runners on the Democratic side are Joe Biden, who I think will be 78 at the end of 2020, Bernie Sanders well into his 70s, Elizabeth Warren, who will be in her 70s. Is that generational shift going to mean trouble for the candidates who right now enter this thing on paper in the strongest position?
I think it will be a problem if they can't appeal to that young demographic of voters. I think that we definitely do have a structural problem in terms of the pipeline of candidates that can rise and become presidential contenders in the Democratic Party. That is absolutely true. That's why you don't have the age diversity in terms of the 2020 prospects. But I do think that there are a number of candidates that you mentioned. I think Elizabeth Warren absolutely can appeal to that millennial demographic that Evan was speaking to, because they are a lot more progressive than the baby boomer generation. They are for marriage equality. They are for choice. And so with those issues becoming, I think, front and center as we go into the midterm elections, with a Supreme Court vacancy now going to be at the center of the fight, I do think that's going to encourage the Republican base to turn out. But the flip side of that is that there are a lot of millennials who have no capacity to imagine a world where there is no access to birth control, where there is no access to legal and safe abortion. That's not happened in my lifetime. That's not happened in a millennial's lifetime. And so I think that this is going to be an election that is really for the fight of the soul of the country and the moral center. But that is all about this millennial generation being more progressive than our mothers and our grandmothers.
Evan, listening to you diagnose the Republican predicament as you see it, and saying they need to change on all of these things, are you one of those Republicans, sort of like George Will, who wants them to lose this November to precipitate that change?
It's not necessarily that I want them to lose. I want them to wake up and recognize that there is the sky falling.
But do they need to lose to recognize that?
I think they need to listen to smart people. To be honest with you, I think Democrats can actually blow it in 2020. If you nominate somebody who's too far and outside of the mainstream and more beholden to the Bernie base than to the more moderates and the independent voters, you're not going to win. That's why I actually believe the smartest ticket Democrats could run would be Joe Biden and Seth Moulton. No drama and just returning to decency.
All right, Zerlina Maxwell, Maria Teresa Kumar, Evan Siegfried.